Hi, this is Josh with Hike Logistics, and this is Trailheads, the show where we are introducing you to people who love the trail as much as you do. And today I'm sitting with a trailhead who is our guest today. I'm really excited to have Sean Gobin, who is the founder and executive director of Warrior Expeditions. He's going to tell us what Warrior Expeditions does here in just a moment, and he's got a fantastic story to tell. And take it away, Sean. Tell us, what does Warrior Expeditions do? What is it?
Sure thing. So, in a nutshell, Warrior Expeditions is a veteran nonprofit outdoor therapy program that helps veterans transition from their wartime experiences by participating in long-distance outdoor expeditions. And by long distance, I mean our expeditions typically take between 3 to 6 months to complete.
What kind of expeditions do you send these veterans on?
So we have 3 programs that we support. We have our Warrior Hike program, which is a long-distance hiking program. We have our Warrior Bike program, which is a long-distance bicycle program. And finally, our 3rd program is our Warrior Paddle program, which is a long-distance paddling program.
And tell us what kind of distances. You said about 3 to 6 months for time. I understand, hikers and bikers will vary in how far they want to go in a particular day. But is there a range of sort of mileages, say, for hikers, bikers, paddlers?
So we have, under our Warrior Hike program, we have 2 sets of trails. Our first set of trails we refer to as our national trails, which basically are trails that cross the country. And that includes the Appalachian Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, and the Pacific Crest Trail. And those trails range from 2,200 miles to 3,100 miles. Under our Warrior Hike program, we also have what we call our estate trails, which are trails that either cross or circle a single state. And those trails range anywhere from 800 miles, which is the Arizona Trails, our shortest, to the Buckeye Trail, which circles Ohio and is 1,400 miles long. Under our Warrior Bike program, we have one trail currently that we do, and it's the Trans-America Trail that goes from coast to coast, from Virginia to Oregon. And that trail is approximately 4,200 miles long. And then our Warrior Paddle program includes paddling the entire length of the Mississippi River from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico. And the Mississippi River, the section that we paddle, is approximately 2,300 miles long.
How did this idea get started? So you're the founder. I assume this was your brainchild. And how did you come up with the idea to start Warrior Expeditions?
Well, it actually goes back to when I was a kid. Growing up, we had an RV, and my family, we would visit all the national parks during the summer breaks. And I remember hiking across the Appalachian Trail and then learning that this trail goes from Georgia to Maine. And I remembered learning that only 20% of the people who attempt it actually make it. And so for me, that was a personal challenge that was always burned into the back of my mind. And so fast forward, I joined the Marines. I'd spent 12 years in the Marines, which included 3 combat tours to both Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was during my last deployment in Afghanistan in 2011 that I decided that I needed a life change, and then I was going to get out of the Marines in the spring of 2012 and start grad school the following fall. And that essentially gave me the perfect window of opportunity to do this bucket list item that I'd been wanting, or I'd been interested in since I was a kid. And so that was the plan. And so come March 14th, 2012, I drove out the back gate of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina with a bunch of old military equipment that I had laying around the garage, and I spent the next 4.5 months hiking the entire Appalachian Trail. And it was on the trail that I came up with the idea of creating Warrior Expeditions.
And what inspired you? I mean, obviously the trail itself is inspiring in a certain way, but what inspired you specifically that this would be something that would benefit other people and specifically veterans like yourself?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, when I started the trail, it was a personal goal, something of a personal challenge that I was embarking on. But right before I started the trail, as I mentioned before, I had just gotten back from Afghanistan. And at the time, the transition program the Marine Corps had in place upon returning from a combat deployment was to sit through a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation. And that was our transition from a year-long deployment to a combat zone. And so, as you can imagine, it's woefully insignificant, especially coming off of 3 deployments. And so, while I was on the trail, the first half of my trail was a pretty painful experience. I didn't know what I was doing. I had all the wrong gear, all the wrong shoes. Of course, when you hike the Appalachian Trail starting in spring, you have all the bad spring weather. And so, the first half of the trail was an exercise in pain management, if you will. But once I got to Virginia, and I kind of got everything figured out, and all of my overuse injuries finally started to heal, and the weather started to finally change, I realized that I was going through this incredible therapeutic transformation while on the trail. And it was at that point that I was like, wow, I wonder if doing something like this would be beneficial for other veterans as well, that whose transition was not needs were not met by a 20-minute PowerPoint. And then, so interestingly enough, upon finishing the Appalachian Trail, I learned that the very first person to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail was a World War II veteran by the name of Earl Schaefer. He came back from World War II. He had lost his best friend Walter on the Pacific Campaign, and he was really having a hard time when he got home. And so, after languishing for about 3 years or so, he told his friends and family that he needed to go walk off the war. And so he went down to Georgia, and 4.5 months later became the very first person to thru-hike the entire Appalachian Trail.
Which we'll just pause here and say was quite a feat when he did it, because number one, no one else had ever done it before, and the maps really were non-existent, as was the trail in some places. And for him to complete that in 4.5 months with really no trail support whatsoever is pretty astonishing. 4.5 months is a pretty good pace anyway, and as you know, that's what you said you took. So Schaffer must have been a pretty impressive hiker, I must say.
Yeah, he had quite the constitution in order to accomplish such a feat in 4.5 months. Like you said, I remember reading his book, and he had hard leather shoes that he'd put sand in order to toughen up his feet because of the blisters. He didn't have a tent, so he's basically setting up a tarp to sleep under every night. He was cooking everything. He had to cook each meal, build a fire to cook his meals. So, and I remember reading that he had to ask locals if they had remembered where the CCC crews were building the trail years prior, and so they'd point up to a ridge line, and he'd have to go bushwhack up the side of a mountain to get up back onto a ridge line to find the trail, and then he'd be back on the trail. So yeah. To pile on all those hardships in addition to walking, 2,000 plus miles, it was quite an accomplishment.
You said a moment ago that you realized at some point in Virginia or beyond that you were going through a kind of a healing process. I forget the exact term you used, but so then you complete the trail. Fair to say that the trail experience, that expedition was a more thorough healing process or recovery process than the 20-minute PowerPoint you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I get off the trail a different person, and it's scary to think, what path my life would have led if I hadn't have done the trail immediately after getting out of the Marines. I equate, there's three really impactful parts of the experience in which I based warrior expeditions off of. The first one is just, you having the time and space in nature to process and decompress from those experiences that you had, during your combat deployments. Unfortunately, when you're in the military, I described it, at least when I was in, we called it basically the deployment assembly line. So you go on deployment, you'd come home, you train up for the next deployment, go on the next deployment. And there was no system in place to help again, process and decompress from those deployments. And so through hiking the Appalachian Trail, when you're in nature for, all day, for months on end, without the distractions of a computer and the news, and now you've got cell phone coverage for most of it, but even then, you're hiking most of the day, so you're not in front of your cell phone necessarily. And so what it does is it takes all of those external distractions away. And what it does is it forces your brain then to reflect upon all of your life experiences, and through that process of almost forced reflection, because your brain has nothing to do all day while you're hiking for 8 to 10 hours a day, it forces the brain to really start to reflect and process those experiences and put them away. When you get out of the military, it's such a fast pace as you transition out and you try to establish your life on the civilian side, that you never really have the time or opportunity to process these things. And what we see typically with veterans is it's usually 3 to 5 years later, if you haven't addressed the trauma that you've experienced, it really starts to surface. What most people refer to now as post-traumatic stress, the symptoms. So having that time and space in nature for months on end, it forces the process to occur. The second thing that I noticed that was really profound was to hike the trail with other veterans that understand what you're going through. So I hiked the trail with another Marine that I was deployed with in Afghanistan, and so it was interesting as you go through the process to have somebody there that both understands what you went through while you were deployed, and then what you're going through now as you're starting this transition process back into the civilian world. So.
Sure.
To have somebody be able to talk it out. So, at one point you're cycling everything through your head, and then at some point in the journey you can actually talk it out as you go through it. The third and the last thing was the people that you meet from the communities along the way were amazingly supportive. And so, we had people literally bending over backwards that didn't even know us to support our hike, that would get into a town and offer us a place to stay. If we were in a bind and we needed to get up, right to the store to change out a broken hiking pole, whatever you need on the trail, just the kindness of people was really profound, which is, the direct opposite of what you're experiencing while you're deployed. So, while you're deployed and you're experiencing combat, you're dealing with, the absolute worst of what humanity has to offer. And the problem is once you're exposed to that for so long, your brain starts to rewire itself, and you start looking at people and humanity in a very negative connotation. And that negative connotation is what I think causes a lot of veterans when they come home to really isolate themselves, which then causes depression, and then unfortunately in a lot of cases suicide. So the key is, how do you break that cycle? And when you do something like a through hike, meeting all these wonderful supportive people along the way starts to rewire your brain, and you start to reestablish that basic faith in humanity, and then it breaks you out of that cycle of isolation and depression and unfortunately suicide. So those were the three things that I was able to put my thumb on during my hike. This is why this experience is therapeutic for veterans that are coming home from the wars.
Yeah, those are really interesting observations, and they make sense. I'm not a veteran myself, and so I can't relate to your experience. There was something that you said a few moments ago that I think I can at least tangentially relate to, and that was, you're talking about being on the trail and reflecting. And I'm not a veteran and have never been in combat, but I do have a stressful job, and I have noticed that when I'm on the trail, just spending that time, I find my mind wanders from place to place to place at will when I'm on the trail. It's really hard for me to focus on any one particular thing, but I feel like my mind is at rest when I'm that way, because I'm not trying to force it to think about something. And so I can, I think, relate to somewhat to the way in which the trail allows your mind to process sort of at will and to be at rest rather than focused on any type of task. You talked about hiking with a friend, with a veteran friend that had been with you on deployment. Is that something you typically try to do with the vets that you send out on these expeditions?
We do. So depending on the trail, we typically send out anywhere between 2 to 10 veterans together. And we start them together just so they've got that opportunity to have camaraderie with other veterans. Obviously they don't hike together for the entire trip. That would have the exact opposite effect of what we were trying to accomplish, making people stick together for 6 months. But you have an automatic, because once we do the kickoffs, you now have, basically an automatic, 2 to 10 fellow veterans that you're going to go through this journey with. And so it gives a lot of opportunity for that sense of camaraderie, and then also the sense of, it's basically like a mini support group while you're on the trail. Have someone to talk to that understands what you're going through. And to dovetail off of that too, as I speak through the benefits of through hiking for veterans, it's true across the entire spectrum of anybody who's dealt with hardship or trauma. You see a lot of people on the trail, they're dealing with, they were abused as children, domestic violence, drug issues, people who lost their jobs, people who just went through a divorce, someone who just had a death of a spouse. Trauma is trauma is trauma, and being on the trail is very therapeutic, no matter what it is you're trying to, come to terms with. So.
Yeah, good observation. In what year did you actually start Warrior Expeditions? How long has it been extant?
So I finished my thru hike on July 31st, 2012, and then started grad school. And then shortly thereafter, I ended up connecting with a number of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's board members who, in honor of Earl Schaefer, wanted to figure out some kind of a veteran outreach program for veterans along the Appalachian Trail. And they had been following my hike on social media, and so we met, and they kind of gave me what their thoughts were, and I said, it was really interesting. I had the same idea while I was hiking the trail, and so from there we started working together. And that winter, we were able to secure a bunch of companies to donate gear. I tapped into all of the communities that supported my hike as a community support network. We put the announcement out there that winter that we were going to start a veteran thru hiking program the next spring. And we had a bunch of applications come in. In March of 2013, we supported our first group of 14 veterans on the Appalachian Trail. And so that was the first year that we started it.
It's a pretty amazingly fast turnaround time to get something like that off the ground or on the trail, as the case may be.
Yeah, it was. I look back on it, and I don't know how I made it through that first year. Also, while I'm in grad school at the same time as I'm, creating this entire organization from the ground up for the first year. So it was really crazy. It was a really crazy year.
So from that time to this, do you have a number of how many veterans have gone on expeditions with Warrior Expeditions?
Not off the top of my head, but I know it's like 200 and change at this point. I want to say 230, 40, 50, something like that.
And continually growing, I would anticipate, correct?
Yeah, so we typically now that we're at full capacity, we typically support about 40 veterans per year across the 10 trails that we have programs on. So so every year there's another 30 to 40 veterans that we put through the programs.
That's fantastic. And I understand that one of the things that you do that I like about your program too is unlike your own hike where you start off with whatever military gear you still have lying around, I understand you outfit these vets and really support them along the trail, and even I think there's even a financial component of a stipend. Is that right?
Yeah, so we offer a few different points of support for the veterans that participate in our program. And the first thing, we completely outfit them with all the gear and the clothing. And
the right
stuff
gear
that we
and
know
clothing,
that
right?
I'm sorry?
The correct gear and clothing, correct?
Yeah, so, I always use my hike as the perfect example of, how not to start a thru hike. And then over the years, we've continuously refined, our gear set and our clothing set with, what are most people using that's out there, what's the best rated stuff, and we continue to tweak our kit every year. So, our veterans are starting the trails with, a better gear set than probably 90 to 95% of the people that are out there. Just because we've been doing it for 8 years now, and every year we continue to learn and update and tweak. So the idea is to set the veterans up for success, so they can have a therapeutic experience of the trail. So we outfit them with the clothing and the gear. We connect them with our community supporters along the way. So, typically every 3 to 5 days as the trail passes through various towns along the way, we have a network of community supporters that they can reach out to that provide essentially, 3 types of support for them. They'll give them a ride to and from the trailhead, a place to stay where they can take a shower and do laundry. And since you're burning approximately 6,000 calories a day, 4 to 6,000 calories a day, they'll take them out to dinner, and or breakfast the next day before putting them back out on the trail.
Wow.
And then we also offer them a $300 monthly stipend, which is intended for them to purchase their resupply items along the way. And then the last thing we provide is we have 2 psychologists on our board that are also veterans, an Air Force and a Marine Corps veteran. And they've essentially taken the cognitive behavioral therapy module that is the typical module of therapy that you'll receive from a psychologist if you're going to see a psychologist for trauma. And through that module of therapy, you receive all of these coping strategies. So, if you're feeling like this, then try this. And what we've done is we've taken that module of therapy and we've turned it into weekly email messages that the veterans get while they're on the trail. So, for example, every Wednesday, they'll get an email that says, hey, if you're experiencing, stressors like this, then try a coping mechanism like this. And so, there's a therapy, there's a psychoeducational component to the program as well. And we give them those tools while they're on the journey to, put into practice.
That's very interesting, and so I'm really excited about what it is that you do, and excited to know that this type of program is out there. I was just a few days ago actually in Hawaii doing some hiking with my brother-in-law who's in the Army, and we were talking about this conversation coming up that I was going to have with you, and suffice it to say, he thinks it's a fantastic idea, and he as a soldier himself can see the value of something like this. Someone who he enjoys the outdoors and of course appreciates the stresses of going on deployment, and so I'm really excited that there's guys like you out there with programs like yours who are supporting maybe not me directly, but people who are close to me and people in my family. So thank you for what you do. You're providing a really important service.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It's also not bad too. I get to travel around the country in an RV and kick off trails for 6 months out of the year. So
not too bad of a gig, right?
No, I can't complain.
So do you have any big plans for what's next? You've expanded from originally sort of the hike-only model to going to hiking, biking, and paddling. I don't know if there are any other expeditions you're planning to add or just to maybe grow what you already have, but what are sort of your aspirational plans for Warrior Expeditions?
Yeah, so we started a new thing a couple years ago that we've been growing on. We have a Facebook group for all of our former veterans that have gone through the programs, and of course everyone's always discussing about getting together and doing another hike together. And so we decided, well, we just facilitate that. And so what we do now is every fall for Veterans Day, we meet up in Washington, D.C., and we hike a section of the C&O Canal Trail, which is great because they've got the old stone lock houses that they've turned into lodges along the trail. Mm-hmm. And the 3 days leading up to Veterans Day, we'll hike along the C&O Canal Trail, and we stay at the lodges. And then at the very end, the last day, we open it up to the public, and we'll hike into D.C. And we'll visit all the war memorials in the Washington Mall. And then one of our board members has an office building right there by the Capitol building, and we do a giant reception with barbecue and beer and blues. And so it's a great opportunity for our veterans to stay connected and to reconnect, and also to meet the other veterans that have gone through the other programs. So we've been doing that now. This fall will be our 3rd year doing it, which it's been great, and we look forward to that every year. Something else we're doing new this year is I mentioned our Warrior Bike program follows the Trans-America Trail from Virginia to Oregon. And we've been doing that since 2016. But one of the pieces of feedback that we got was, at some points the traffic can be a little unnerving. And since we're an outdoor therapy program, traffic is not really in line with what we're trying to achieve. And so this year we're taking our Warrior Bike program, and instead of doing the Trans-America Trail, we're going to do the Great Divide mountain bike route, which goes from Canada to Mexico, and it follows the Continental Divide. So it's very similar to the Continental Divide Trail that we hike, except now we're going to bike it. And so that's going to be our new trail that we're testing out this year for our Warrior Bike program, because it'll be all off-road and really immersed in nature. So you'll have that nature component that we had, but not as much as we would have liked with the Trans-America Trail.
Yeah, interesting.
And then, and then the last thing we're going to try for this year is that we're going to do new for this year is the Mountains to Sea Trail, which is a 1,200-mile trail that crosses the state of North Carolina, where the first section of the trail follows the Appalachian Mountain Range and the Smokies from Clingman's Dome north, and then you cut across what I call the flatland of the state, and then you get to the coastline and you hike from approximately the Wilmington area up to the Outer Banks. So it's thus the Mountains to Sea Trail. But one of the pieces of feedback we've gotten is the flatland section of the trail is pretty horrible in the middle of the summer in North Carolina hiking along paved roads.
Right.
So we're going to turn this year. We're turning the Mountains to Sea Trail into what I'm referring to as our triathlon trail. So we're going to hike the mountain section. Then our veterans are going to transition into bikes, and they're going to bike across the flatland part of the state. And then when they get to the coast, they're going to transition into sea kayaks, and they're going to sea kayak up the intercoastal waterway up to the Outer Banks. So our Mountains to Sea Trail is going to become our hike, bike, paddle program. And so you're going to test that out this year as well.
Very cool. I like that idea. I do not, however, like the idea of hiking on pavement generally. This is why your plan here seems attractive to me.
Yeah, this should make that trail, the fun factor should go up quite a bit with our new model this year.
I would think so. Well, Sean, it's been very nice having you and chatting with you about Warrior Expeditions. Again, I thank you for what it is that you do. Even though it doesn't directly impact me, I'm grateful to you for supporting my friends and my family who are veterans and soldiers. And you're doing something really important, and I'm really excited to get to meet you and to talk with you about what it is that you do, and certainly wish you all kinds of success in the future as you continue to support vets.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's certainly been my pleasure. Maybe we'll have you on again at some point, and you can update us, and you can tell us how these new programs have gone, and maybe what you're doing new at that time.
Yep, sounds great. I'd love to come back.
Thanks a lot. And thank you, viewers, for watching. Thank you for watching this episode of Trailheads. We look forward to seeing you again here very shortly on our next episode, where we will introduce you to someone else who loves the trail as much as you do. Until then, we hope you have very happy trails.